and we're going to talk about some bioenergetic technologies today. Basically, this is an overview lecture. I'm going to go through some of the slides very quickly, and others we'll spend some time with. Now, if you look at the development of the science of electronic medicine over the last 200 years, you'll find that people have now come to the point where you can design a waveform that'll have a drug-like effect. And this is not information that is widely available in the medical field because it is economically damaging to certain interests. And so you look at the fact that this information just really doesn't have any parents. It's more like a lot of adopted stepchildren running around trying to find a home. So electronic medicine is not widely recognized on a scientific basis. Now, this is a self-explanatory slide that people, when they find a truth, are often ridiculed, or it's opposed, and third, it's accepted as self-evident. And this is very common in any scientific endeavor because you have the population of people that are married to certain concepts or paradigms, and they literally never change their minds, most of them. They basically die out, and the new people take over. That's how it works. I think Thomas Bohm, probably got that name wrong, scientific revolutions. Now, Royal Raymond Rife was one of these people that was violently opposed during his lifetime, and he developed a microscope. Now, his worked with living tissues, and at the same time, nearly, we had the electron microscope that was working with dead tissues. And basically, doctors were told, and it's still around, that you can't see viruses with a live microscope. It's impossible, and because of the theory of optics. Now, there's some people in Germany that have developed an ergonom microscope that are now able to see viruses. And I've actually been in situations where, at a laboratory, where microbiologists refused to look in the microscope because he knew he couldn't see the virus. And he was afraid. It was like, don't look through the telescope with Galileo because you might see something that might violate what you know. And it threatens people to see things that violate what they think they know. So most people are not scientists in the scientific field. I think they're technicians. Scientist is someone who examines data and is willing to change their mind if they find they are wrong. But you'll find that I think 95% of people in the scientific field are more technicians than anything. Rife discovered that he could use frequency machines, generate equipment with plasma tubes, frequencies with plasma tubes, and he would adjust the frequency while looking at organisms under the microscope till they literally exploded. And he called this the mortal oscillatory resonance. This is only one, or mortal oscillatory rate. This is only one way of using this type of equipment. My field and my work has been done toward regeneration as opposed to destruction. But if you're looking at killing microbes, this is one way of doing it. Now, resonant frequency basically is a fundamental property of matter, and that every type of matter, molecule, cell has its own unique wave signature or frequency. So it can actually uptake energy if you're giving that. Example is a group of troops walking across a bridge. If they get in the right rate, that bridge literally can oscillate itself to destruction. If anybody's ever driven an old car and got to a certain point of the highway, it starts vibrating extensively. You go faster or slower than that speed, it would not vibrate as much. That's a resonance rate that you're seeing in common life, and people are nodding their head knowing they've driven those old cars before. So you basically can change or impart energy into a system by using this resonance rate. Now, biological tissues and cells are organized by standing waves of energy. We talk about constructive interference on the inside of the cell, destructive interference on the outside of the cell. I like to put this up there because it ties together the concept of the large and the small. If you look at an electron, it has an inward wave and an outer wave. And the theory is the inward wave comes from all the electrons in the universe, which means that every point is the center. It's kind of a hard concept to grasp, but when you begin to see physics in this way, you'll see that every electron is connected to every other electron. That means everything is connected to everything else. It's kind of a very mind-blowing concept. But if you look at cells, you'll see that cells have an inward flowing current and outward flowing current. And people like Merrill Garnett have been studying this for many years. He's an electrochemist who developed poly-MBA, and I think they probably have a booth here. Now, Rife generated signals. He monitored the destruction of the pathogens with his microscope. And he would take something from an active to a dead state, and you'd actually see the material go from a glowing violet to a dead black when the task was accomplished. So he was actually able to look at the structure of these organisms and look at them in real time. And people really have not duplicated this work because of the limitations in optical theory. Although people that don't worry about the theory and get to the lab bench and do things, they see things, find things that people with the theory would never look for. Now, forced oscillatory resonance is just one path, and he demonstrated that you could resonate at specific frequencies and destroy microbes. And, this was an interesting concept in its time, and people still think about this as the only way to utilize electromedicine. And it's a very narrow definition of this type of work. Now, there was another man named Minkowski who in the 1920s took a different path than Rife, and he generated a multi-wave oscillator. It basically created lots of different frequencies. His concept was that the cells would absorb what they needed, and kind of like a cafeteria in a sense, and you would take what you needed and leave the rest. And he had some reports of healing. He, I think, was killed in New York in a traffic accident on his way to present his material at a scientific, I think at a hospital where they're going to do some research. So that was an interesting development in his life. Now, there's a guy named Jimmy Holman over in Texas, in Plano, who's basically working with equipment that works on regeneration of tissues, and he has websites if you look him up in the future. And he thinks that 98% of the science is in the regeneration part. It's Holman.net, I think, is his website. Nikola Tesla was probably the leading genius behind. He's the one that basically brought us the electrical world. Many of his ideas were adopted by others. He brought us AC current. Edison wanted to use DC current for transmission of power. And DC current, you can only get a few miles away from the power plant. With AC, you can go thousands of miles and transmit power. So, of course, it was the one that took over. He got very little out of it. He died penniless. But he came up with the idea of wireless transmission of power. And power generation in one place and collection in another place. It's kind of similar to solar cells in a sense, except instead of the sun being the generator, it's a man-made generator. And I use this concept because it helps you understand the wireless transmission of energy from the proper types of devices, and you can use selective targets in the cells. And we're going to talk about that if I can get to the slides. I'm just trying to briefly go over some of these fundamental concepts that makes other things more sensible. Now, Alexander Gerbich basically discovered that living cells put out waves of energy, or he called them mitogenic rays. Now, people did not have the equipment at the time he was living in order to explain his observations that waves of energy or rays of energy could affect living creatures, living cells. This was later when Fritz Popp was developing. You should look him up if you're interested in this area. He's one of the leading stars in this type of medicine knowledge. And he came up with the idea of biophotons, theoretically. And if you start reading, some of the books you should read are all of James Oshman's works and articles, Lynn McTaggart's work, The Field. This is kind of a good overview. Robert O. Becker Then you can get anything he's written is a good start. Body Electric is a good place to start. But Oshman is probably one of your better ones as far as contemporary knowledge base of this kind of work. Now, this was a very interesting experiment that I think probably should have gotten a Nobel Prize in a non-commercial world, where they took a culture and they damaged it with I'm trying to remember if this was a radiation or virus they could kill these bacteria with, and they put identical cultures nearby. Now, one was behind lead glass, and the other was behind quartz, and basically they found that the energy coming off these dying cells would kill the ones that would allow ultraviolet light to pass, which was quartz, but would not affect the ones that were shielded by an ultraviolet blocker leaded glass. And the interesting thing about this, it means that living creatures put out energetic fields that can affect other living creatures. Now, this kind of work has a very wide possibilities as far as in the medical field or in research, but it's just really kind of an orphan. Now, biophotonic emissions, the body puts out energy in the forms of light that's coherent, and there's a lot of question, where is it coming from? Is it coming from the mitochondria? Is it coming from the DNA? I tend to go along with the idea at this point that it's probably a DNA communication between the DNA and other parts of the cells. So it's an information signal. And so you literally have lasers at a cellular level. You have microscopic, or you can call them quantum or atomic lasers in a sense, where the DNA is thought are the source of these bursts of coherent light. And it's thought that these are involved in organization and structure of cells. Basically, it's a communication, part of the communication system that tells cells how to do certain things, how to produce, how to move, how to translate proteins. So it's very possible that this is part of the RNA-DNA communication with these biophoton emissions. So there's a lot of theory behind this, and people are doing work. Fritz Popp is one of the people. He's about retired now. But there are, if you look up biophotons, you'll find plenty of articles. I have 5 or 6 books on biophotons now, and a lot of people putting work out in this area. And it can also help explain some of the processes of cancer. He has found with his work that chemicals that change certain frequencies of DNA light will affect DNA repair processes. And that carcinogenic chemicals cause there to be a change in how light is used in the cell, especially in the ultraviolet range. And if it's non-carcinogenic, it won't do that. You can find that particular section in the field if you want to look up more about that on the section on Fritz Popp. Now, I work a lot with the concept that cells emit electromagnetic signals, not so much in the radio wave range and microwave range, which they do very small amounts, but they do a lot in the infrared. Now, infrared is a higher frequency electromagnetic wave than radio wave. But you're looking at the emission of electromagnetic energy. Now, we think of infrared or body heat as waste heat. Well, that's a concept. It's like, is there a junk DNA, or is that DNA we haven't figured out what the purpose is? And my thinking about this is the infrared coming off the body may also be part of the body's communication system, because I've worked with technologies for the last 20 years now where we work with infrared and find that you can have biological effects by certain frequencies of infrared light. There are people out there who've written extensively on photobiology. Tina Carew is one. It's T-I-I-N-A, Carew, K-R-U, K-A-R-U. She's a Russian. She has an entire website which you could generate 300 pages of articles if you want to read that much. But there's equipment out there that works with these concepts of electric medicine. There's frequency generators, microcurrent types, there's contact pads, there's implanted devices using DC current, pulse electromagnetic devices. And I'm going to spend the last 15 minutes of the lecture talking about some of the cellular targets that these devices work on. So there's lots of things out there, lasers, LEDs, plasma devices. This is just basically, you can use computers to generate specific microcurrent by contact. You have different ways of delivering it by pads. You can place them on different points on the body. You can generate electrical currents. If you look in Becker's work, you'll find that the body has biological currents. You can also look at the term biocurrents running through it, and these are thought to be in parallel and in series with the nervous system. And it's likely that the transmission of information is faster through this DC current system than it is through the nervous system. So you're looking at tapping into somewhat the Chinese empirically discovered when you talk about acupuncture meridians. But I think I look at it as a closed electrical system in parallel and series with the nervous system. Becker's thoughts are it's perineural, the connective tissue around nerves is what carries it. Then there's people that talk about acupuncture. So you could spend an hour just talking about the theory of where this comes from. Koreans actually think they've discovered some of these acupuncture meridians with morphology, but I don't know if that work's been duplicated. Now, this is a person who's had contact electrodes placed in with needles around a tumor, and a DC current was applied. In the bottom right slide, you'll see is after 5 treatments, this tumor has begun to recede. And this is done all over Europe, probably some in the United States. Bjorn Bordenstrom, I'm trying to think of it, Bjorn Nordenstrom has written books on this. He's the one that developed the intravenous the catheter they use for cardiac disease. One of the first people to develop catheters. He was on the Nobel Committee for many years, and he's done several things. He's a radiologist that would have been probably applicable for Nobel Prizes, but since he was on the committee, he couldn't get a nomination for it. So it's really a sad state of affairs that one of the most brilliant minds never got really recognized for that. But he did a lot of work with looking at using platinum electrodes with a external current generator around tumors, and finding that many tumors would recede by using this treatment. And there's lots of literature out there about it, and there's hospitals in Europe that do it, some in the United States too, quietly. Now, you can also use plasma tubes where you can generate with a computer, generate specific signals, and then use a tube device to generate the frequency using Nobel gases. And plasmas basically, when get excited by energy or voltage, and you have to use a high voltage. Basically, the best ones use a high voltage with rapid on and off. And you're talking about microseconds toward nanoseconds in the switching process, on and off. So you excite the plasma, you turn it on, turn it off real quick, and it releases a burst of energy. So it's pulsing out an energy field. And so by using these type of devices, you're able to use very rapid pulsing techniques. And so you can modulate this field of energy coming off this with photons of light. And so you're getting a lot of different spectral emissions coming out depending on your mix of Nobel gases in the tubes. And these will generate very specific frequencies. And now what you're looking for, and since I do this a lot, if you're going to buy some kind of device, find somebody that tests their output. Everybody can put numbers on a dial. And, oh yes, it's putting out, oh yeah, it puts out 19,000 kilohertz, and you test it, it's like 14,003. No idea. Then they give you these sheets of information saying, oh, these are the frequencies you want to use. You're not even close. So you want to have something that matches, that somebody's doing output testing, because wouldn't you like to get what you're paying for? I mean, if you're going to use this kind of equipment, use some simple, basic judgment with it and buy the right stuff. Now, there's people that put out pulse LED arrays. These are pretty standard. There's a lot of work being done. A guy named Whelan up in, I think, University of Wisconsin, worked with NASA for years. He's a neurologist. They've done work with the space shuttle. They've done work on nuclear submarines. They've done work with the military. And they have found that using LED phototherapy will cause improved regeneration of injuries. If you are in a spacecraft or a nuclear submarine, you're not getting natural light. And so there's certain frequencies of light that will promote healing. And so LEDs, you're able to use multiple combinations of wavelengths, unlike lasers where you're locked in. Also, you're able to use larger surface area with LEDs, whereas laser, you're locked in. They all have benefits and disadvantages, so you want to do some study on this area. Super bright LEDs are capable of creating the right energy densities and multiple wavelengths. So there's a lot of development and technology in this area. Now, one of the things that you'll probably hear later in the day's lecture, I think Oshman's going to lecture later, is you can start looking at cells. They have certain electronic features. One is called the feature of capacitance, where they're able to store electrical charge. That's the cell membrane. Now, my thinking behind this is the cell membrane is connected up to other cells. So it's like a power distribution center. Mitochondria makes energy, ATP, electrons flow. They're flowing back and forth. There are wired connections between the mitochondria, between the DNA, between the cell membranes. There's an inner and outward flow of current. And it's very likely that there's power distribution and power sharing between cells with this flow of energy. So let's say you have an injury over here, cell's not doing well, he borrows some power. Alabama needs some power, it borrows it from Georgia. We don't think anything about it when we're thinking about power systems. Well, it's probably the same thing happening in the body, because the body is able to conduct electricity around, it's able to conduct light around, and it certainly is able to conduct information around. Now, cells use energy in different ways. And the reason I brought up the capacitance is because the types of fatty acids that you consume are going to determine the cell membrane composition. Your antioxidant status is going to determine whether your cell membranes are damaged by free radicals or not. Antioxidants, of course, also protect against damage to the mitochondria, to the DNA, and the cell membrane. So if you get a lot of lack of antioxidant protection, you can damage your power centers, you can damage your energy production, you can damage your power transmission, your information transmission, and you can damage your genetic material with all the consequences that entails. So you certainly, when you start looking at this, you can apply nutritional knowledge along with electronic knowledge and really accentuate. Now, I'm going to tell you something I did from personal experiments over many years, which is to preload my patients with the nutrients I thought they needed to try to peak out their blood levels. And then at the time when I felt that the nutrients were peaking is when I would apply therapy of electronic therapy. Why? Because I increased cell membrane charge with the techniques I was using. And not only do you increase cell membrane charge, which also is important in activating cell membrane transport of nutrients. So if you want to transport nutrients into the cell, wouldn't you like to have the nutrients available to be transported into the cell? Now, it also facilitates protein synthesis, DNA replication, ATP production. So you can use field energy to charge up not only the cell membranes, but you can also activate the membrane receptors. And we'll probably have slides on this in a few minutes. But the point is, apply proper nutritional knowledge along with your electronic or phototherapeutic medicine, and utilize the concepts. If you know that diabetes is a failure of glucose transport, is it possible that other nutrients also require transport into the cell? And if you can facilitate that transport into the cell, aren't you going to facilitate healing with protein synthesis? I can tell you some very interesting studies that I have personally done in the office. Never could get them published because I would use like 27 nutrients in therapy, and then I'd submit them in. They'd say, no, we want you to do one nutrient, no therapy, because we wanted you to test this thing. I'm like, hey, it's like taking all the fluids out of your car and saying, I'm going to put oil in and see if it'll drive without gasoline or brake fluid, okay? Next test I'm going to do is I'm going to put brake fluid in and nothing else. And you're eventually going to find out if you put gas in, it'll go a little bit, but you can't stop it. And the engine falls out after 30 miles because it's burned up with no oil. So it's kind of insane how the system is developed, but that's the peer review process. Now, you want to restore charge to cells. If you have technologies that can do that, you can do it with phototherapy, you can do it with electronic therapies, with a direct microcurrent, you can do it with plasma devices with the right frequencies. You're going to increase tissue regeneration. Now, you can also use passive devices. I do some work with passive devices where we use stereoisomers of organic materials that will absorb in the infrared band. We put them on the skin, and they'll generate a signal back in the body. It's basically a radio, but it's using infrared instead of radio frequency waves. So we're able to use specific frequencies back into the body. And you can do that for pain control. If anybody has any pain, I'll be glad to see them out there and do some demos afterward. Cell radio is what I like to call it when you're actually able to communicate with, you can use wireless or you can actually use microcurrent. Basically, you're looking at the fact that the cells have tuning circuits. They literally have so many electronic components of capacitors, inductors, transducers. You're looking at biological communication equipment. And you have the ability to amplify signals. And also the fact is your cells are quantum sensitive. Your eyes can look up, can see 1 photon of light. 1 photon. That's quantum sensitivity. And I believe that quantum sensitivity is all over the body. There's a process called electroconformational coupling, whereas if you hit the right amount, the right frequency or wave with the right energy density, you can cause a protein or enzyme to switch on or off. And you can look up electroconformational coupling. And this is an interesting concept because you're looking at changing the electrical charge on the protein backbones of enzymes, and when you change that charge distribution, the protein folds to a different position. On, off, on, off. You start looking at that, you can use electronic devices to switch on and off proteins. When you start doing that, aren't you looking at like a pharmacological effect? Yes. So you have frequency windows, you have therapeutic windows. I mean, you don't want to throw X-rays and gamma rays at somebody if you're trying to do some healing and regeneration. You want to keep it in the near microwave, infrared, visible light, maybe near ultraviolet. Those are basically your therapeutic range. Outside this range, you start getting into danger. Now, people will use radio waves and things to heat up tissues. This is a different part. I'm talking about regeneration right now. So if you're looking at, there's frequency, there's specific windows as well as amplitude windows. This is some of work is from Ross Addy, among others, where they're looking at windowing effects that have biological. So it's like certain frequencies have an effect, others do not. Now, you're also looking at matching the amplitude with, if you're using, say, a device, you've got to have the right energy density coming in too. So there may not be enough energy transferred if you're using, you might be right on target but not have the right energy. So there's a whole bunch of things that go together. This is why this is such an early field. Now, we've talked about lasers. I only got 10 minutes. You can use it for pain control, healing, anti-aging effect. People use it for wrinkle therapy. You're looking at this type of therapy uses DNA, increases DNA and RNA synthesis, increased production of collagen. Hey, that's great if you're doing wrinkles. It's also good if you're trying to heal up, say, a broken tissue or ligament damage that's occurring. You can improve lymph drainage, tissue repair, immune cells. Now, this is a great concept. They're here. They're giving this person radiation, then they're going to give them phototherapy to treat the problem. You know, so it's kind of like they got part of it right. And this is one of the ones that NASA worked with called a warp 10. Here's an ulcer that's being treated with laser phototherapy. You can see how much healing. Now, what happens when you see an ulcer like that? What you're looking at is an electron deficient tissue. If you can give electrons, you can improve the healing. You actually work as an electronic antioxidant. And you start thinking in terms of electronic antioxidants, you start seeing this, all of a sudden you go, wow, what a change. Now, what happens if you add some other antioxidants with it? I think you accelerate it. Adults do not regenerate their fingertips when they're cut off. A child will, somewhere between 5 years and 10 years of age. A child that cuts off the tip of his finger will lose the ability to regenerate the tissue. But if properly treated with the right devices, here's May 16th. Here's June 13th. Here's August 11th. Even the fingerprint came back on this adult with the nail. Now, that was an interesting thing. You can't do this. Except you can. We got 8 minutes left. So we evolve in a sea of electromagnetic energy. Isn't any surprise that we have an electrical nature? And this is on the left side is a glass of water with a colloidal material activated by a sound wave. This is a sea creature, a radiolarian. And I think these forms represent energy stored in coherent forms. That's why I put them up. You should also look up the picture of the electron. They recently took a picture of an electron, I think February. It was in Science magazines. And you can look it up on the net. Electrons finally photographed. And you'll start seeing these patterns that look just very similar to what I just showed you, what an electron looks like. So we talk about interference patterns when two waves come together. Well, guess what? You've got an energy field around you. When you walk up close to somebody else, they're impinging on your field, you're impinging on their field, you're transmitting information. You ever see somebody you immediately hated? Don't know why? Ever met somebody you immediately liked and don't know why? You're exchanging information at a cellular level and have no clue about it unless you're conscious about this. So you have a standing field around you. So there's research, Valerie Hunt, among others, have reported that the changes occur in the field before they occur in the physical form. And the concept of electrodynamic theory of life is that organization and control of cellular functions are controlled by the field. So if you have damaged tissue and you can improve the field energy, the pattern formation, you're going to improve the healing response. There are cellular mechanisms, which we only have 6 minutes to cover. So we know we can absorb energy through resonance. We know that externally administered signals that match a frequency that the cell is capable of absorbing will be absorbed. And this is an example of the sympathetic vibration. One tuning fork vibrates, the other tuning fork. You play a violin and you have violins in harmony, others will start vibrating in the room. Okay? You can demonstrate that yourself. Or take tuning forks that are identical, hit one, the other one will vibrate. And so matching resonance promotes healing, and you want to restore current flow, recharge the cell membrane, improve cell-to-cell communication. And this is when you start getting in your nutritional knowledge base, where you start thinking, hey, what sugars do the cells use to communicate with? What fats make up the cell membrane? What is involved in amino acid transport? Do I have the amino acids in the bloodstream to transport? What minerals are involved? So I've been doing nutritional medicine for 28 years, and it gets to be an infinite regress. You just have to have some boundaries here. You get areas of electrical resistance, tissues don't naturally flow, they do not heal very well. When you start restoring that electrical flow to that tissue that's injured, what occurs is you immediately turn on ATP formation, protein synthesis, DNA replication, the cells begin to heal. And all of a sudden you take a tissue that will not heal, it will heal. I used to restore bone fractures about 50% faster than anybody else in my community because I gave them concentration of nutrients that were involved in bone repair plus therapy at the same time. And like, wow, why is this occurring? 4 minutes. Body is composed of liquid crystals. They have particular properties. But one of the things you have to understand about liquid crystals, they're kind of like optoelectronic devices. So they have an optical property and electronic property. They can store information. Look at all the different structures of the molecular level that are liquid crystals. Cell membrane lipids, nucleic acids, proteins, cholesterol, which is a repair molecule and an antioxidant. Your cholesterol's high, many times it's due to the fact that your antioxidant levels are low. So when you start looking at liquid crystals, they have the antenna-like functions. So the cells have properties of electronic components. They have antenna-like functions. They exhibit cooperative behavior. They can resonantly absorb information and energy. They are also natural semiconductors, which means they can transmit information around. There's targets that you can go after. Now, you can actually, if you know the length of an object, or the molecular weight, you can actually figure out the frequency. This is basically antenna physics. So molecular antennas exist in the cell. Resonant absorption of energy by these antennas will induce electron flow. Now that is really very important because you now can create an electrical current. Guess what? What does the mitochondria do? It creates an electron flow. You're like an external mitochondria when you start thinking about it. So molecules are tuned antennas. If you match the resonance, physical match, where the transfer of energy takes place, and you start looking at the structure of enzymes and helical structures, and you start looking at antennas, and you start thinking, my God, these things are designed to be electronic components. They're not just accidentally put there that way. We only have 2 minutes. We have molecular antennas you all know about, chlorophyll. Hey, they absorb certain frequencies of light. What about antennas that absorb certain frequencies of infrared? We have those too. We got visible light, we got infrared light, you got DNA. The National Security Agency unsuccessfully attempted to put national security order on formulas for calculating the frequencies of DNA. Charlene Boehm, I think B-O-E-H-M, you can look her up, she has patents on this now on the U.S. Patent Office of how to calculate the frequencies of DNA. Biological absorption and conversion. Certain molecules are designed to absorb specific wavelengths. We think nothing of the fact that the eyes have different different molecules that absorb different colors or are sensitive to different colors. That's just natural. Well, the same things happen all over the body. You get conformational changes in the membrane receptor complexes. We got 1 minute. Now, the first messenger signals could be a chemical, a drug. It could be needling. It could be piezoelectric. People dance. They feel better. Thermal. Moxibustion's been around for years. Acoustical. People use sound therapy. Light, EMF lasers, and LED phototherapy can do it. Radio waves, microwaves, magnetic, electrical, infrared. All these can activate these signals. And since we have 1 minute, this is electroconformational coupling. So enzymes and receptor proteins can be activated by chemical signals or by electrical signals or photonic signals if you have the right frequency range, amplitude. And I'm going to leave here and thank everybody for coming this early in the morning to this lecture. And I usually give these lectures in like 2 days. So we're giving you a short version of a 2-day seminar. Thank you very much.